crime fighters. I'm Ray the DA, and this is Straight Talk. Does anyone even care about the costs and consequences of crime on victims? Well, it costs too much to incarcerate criminals, said our legislature, criminal justice policy, and the anti-punishment lobby called the Pew Foundation. That's what seems to have driven them to pass what I call the infamous House Bill 463, that catch and release experiment with the safety and security of our system. House Bill 463, plain and simple. It was a law designed to drastically reduce the number of convicted criminals in our prisons and leave them on our streets. The only cost they seemed to care about was the cost to send convicted criminals to prison or jail and keep them there. In their rush to release criminals, they ignored the real costs suffered by the victims of these hooligans. Nowhere have I seen any discussion, or even concern for that matter, for the victims of crime. Just the cost to incarcerate convicted criminals. Our legislators, criminal justice policy makers, and the anti-punishment lobby simply put a price tag on the safety and security of our citizens. They said your safety and security is costing too much. And in effect, they said, when they decided that most lawbreakers should not be incarcerated. I recently read a publication by the National Institute of Justice, and it was entitled Victim Costs and Consequences, A New Look. It deals with the calculation of the full costs of crime suffered by crime victims. Their study includes the important impact of crime-induced fear and the necessary quality of life changes that those situations require by that victimization. For example, if the only cost of a robbery would calculate the out-of-pocket costs to a victim, it may amount to less than $100. However, when you calculate the fear, suffering, and the loss of quality of life, then the cost of that robbery escalates. It skyrockets. That's a more realistic calculation of the real cost of that crime. So did any of these anti-incarceration advocates ever study the real costs suffered by victims before they enacted this criminal-friendly law? Did they ever compare the costs of crime to the costs of incarceration? If they did, I've never seen it, never even heard of it. Don't you think that the costs of criminal victimization would be important in formulating criminal justice policy? Don't you think that identifying and quantifying the costs and consequences of victimization would be helpful in examining our crime problem and identifying more effective ways to deal with it? By simply ignoring proven ways to reduce crime that can lead to unnecessary suffering on the part of crime victims. For example, suppose an additional 1 year of incarceration of a repeat burglar would prevent 20 future burglaries. The out-of-pocket losses, property loss, damage, fear, and loss of quality of life for those burglaries would be about $30,000. Yet the annual cost of a prison cell is $16,000 to $20,000. Did our legislators, criminal justice policymakers, or lobbyists make such a cost-benefit analysis before the wholesale release of prison inmates? They certainly should have. I believe elected leaders owe at least that to their constituents. Well, be assured, crime fighters, we're going to be looking at those real costs of victimization, and we intend to compare them to the costs of incarceration. And we'll see how we can best spend our tax dollars. I'm Ray the DA, and this is Straight Talk.